Hello everyone, my name is Manoj Kumar of 3rd year CSCA. Today I am going to explain about the static scoping and the dynamic scoping. Before knowing about the static scoping and the dynamic scoping, let us know what is scope and why do we use this concept. Scope. One of the basic reasons for scoping is to keep the variables in different parts of the program so that we can use the variables whenever we want. Let us take the examples as they were the local variables and the global variables. So the concept of local and the global variables comes under this scoping procedure. The scoping is generally divided into the two classes. One is said to be called as static scoping and the dynamic scoping. Static scoping is also called as a lexical scoping. The static scoping is mostly used in the languages like the C, C++ or the Java. In order to know more about the static scoping and the dynamic scoping, let us know the differences between them. So it is a very easy procedure to know them. So the static versus the dynamic scoping. Static scoping. The static scoping is very easy to understand just by looking at the code. We can see what type of variables are used in the scope just by looking at the text editor. But it is not in the case of the dynamic scoping, because the dynamic scoping does not concentrate about the code, it only concentrated about the execution. Here it going to consider about the execution means going to consider its execution time and the way it executes the code. Whenever a new function is set up and executed, a new scope is set to be pushed into the stack. Now let us know what are the advantages and the disadvantages of the static scoping and the dynamic scoping. The advantages and disadvantages of the static scoping and the dynamic scoping are static scoping and its advantages. As we know that the static scoping is very easy to understand because it can be determined at the compile time and it's a bit faster execution time. It has the less error prone because the variables can be accessed only within a specified scope or in the case of the defined scope. These are the advantages. Whereas in the case of a disadvantage is that it is very difficult to debug the program because the scope of the variables can be less flexible. So these are the advantages and the disadvantages of the static scoping. Now let us know the advantages and disadvantages of the dynamic scoping. Advantages. It is more flexible. It is said to be called as more flexible because variables can be accessed at any part of the program. It is very easier to write the code because we can access the variables anywhere at any time whenever we are required in the case of the dynamic scoping. The disadvantages is that it has a slower execution time because we are going to get the variables from the wherever we want at any time we can get it, and that makes it more error prone because the variables can be accessed from the unexpected places. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of the dynamic scoping. In order to know more about the dynamic scoping, dynamic scoping is set up in having of the two types, or it is going to have of a two axes. One is set to be called as the deep axis and the shallow axis. Deep axis. Here the basic data structure which we are going to use is set to be called as a stack. The basic concept is to keep the stack of an active variables. We are in this deep axis, instead of using of the control links, we are going to use the access links, and we are going to search or find the variable which is required to us from the top to bottom of the stack until we find the recent activation record. The method of accessing of the non-local variable is said to be called as in the deep axis. As we are going deep into the stack until we are going to get the required activation record. So this is said to be called as the deep axis. Now let us consider an example in order to get you understanding about the deep axis. Void main, and the value 12 is said to be stored in the variable z. Function z contains of the two variables x and y, and the value 3 is said to be stored in x, and the value 4 is stored in y. And the function f, it undergoes an addition between the x and y, and the value of this addition is shall be stored in the z. And the function h contains of in the two variables z and the y. Value 3 is stored in z, and the value 2 is shall be stored in the y. And the function, and these are the remaining functions, and these are the functions. In order to explain you about the dynamic scope, here the main function. Here the main function contains z is equals to 12. So we are going to write main contains z is equals to 12. And now the function which is going to be called is g function. And the g function contains the two variables, one is set to be x and the y. X is equals to 3 and y is equals to 4. Same, x is equals to 3 and y is equals to 4. Here we are not going to change any value because the main does not contain any x and y variable. It contains only the z variable. But the g does not contain any z variable, so no need to change. And the next function to be called is h, and the h contains two variables, z is equals to 3 and y is equals to 2. And the z is equals to 3 and y is equals to 2. Same has been written. But here the z variable is present in the main. So we are going to change the value of 12 to 3. And it has been changed. And the value of y is equals to 2. But the function g contains the value y also. So that also going to be changed from 4 to 2. And the value of y also changed. And the next function to be called is f function. And the f function undergoes addition between the x and y value. Here the x value is equals to 3 and y value is equals to 2. So addition of 3 plus 2 gives us the 5. And the value of 5 is said to be stored in the z. But the z is said to be stored in the main, and the z is equals to 3, which has been changed from 12. And now we are going to change the value of 3 to 5. So now finally the z value is equals to 5, x is equals to 3, and y is equals to 2. This is the mechanism of solving the deep axis problems. Now let us consider the shallow axis. Shallow axis. The idea to keep the central storage and allocate one slot for every variable name. If the names are said to be not created at the runtime, then the storage layout can be fixed at the compile time. The shallow axis is said to be having a very fast access. So this is about the deep axis and the shallow axis of the dynamic scope. Thank you.